I'm delighted to be able to welcome Dr. Carolyn Bennett with us today. Minister Bennett was first elected to Parliament in 1997, and she's been the Minister of State for Public Health and also set up the first public health agency of Canada. She has had a lot of firsts in her life. She is an advocate for women and has worked in that role publicly. She is an advocate for the healthcare system. She actually wrote a book about the healthcare system, Kill or Cure. She is a hero for women's issues. She has championed just about every underdog in Canada, and really in this role of hers as our new Minister for Indigenous Affairs, she has come at the most crucial point in our history of setting straight the toxic stain that is on all of our lands as a result of how we have treated our First Peoples. So I have another name for Minister Bennett. She's not just the Minister of Indigenous and Northern Affairs, she is the Minister of Social Justice and Fairness. And we are thrilled to welcome you.
Well, thank you, Mary. That's amazing. It gives goosebumps, actually, in terms of what there is to do and what we get to do together because of wonderful organizations like yours and the partnerships that are out there that need to be tapped into. So, as always, we need to acknowledge that we're here on the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of New Credit, and it is that we want to thank and are here to celebrate you, Mary, as well, in terms of your formidable legacy and future for Canada and the world. And I think some of you, it's not that far from here that I think I first went to a Roots of Empathy program. It was then Park School. It's now Nelson Mandela School. And we got to watch the mum teacher and the kindergartens and the grade 8s, and it was with John Godfrey. We were part of a children's caucus then that we had in our caucus, and we went to learn a little bit about what were the kinds of things that we could do. I then remember feeling that I was a cheerleader for Roots of Empathy, thinking, how come this isn't everywhere? And now we find out it is. So, but one of the things that I've told Mary this story a couple of times was that when I was Minister of State for Public Health, we didn't have a lot in common with Alberta in trying to talk about social determinants or poverty, violence, the environment, shelter, equity, education, what then I felt as the Minister of Social Determinants of Health. But the health minister then, Iris Evans, she and I bonded over Roots of Empathy because she saw it as an evidence-based program where she could actually make proper investments and see real results. And so I think I told Mary that in 2006, when it wasn't the best election ever for Liberals, but I managed to get reelected, that the only flowers that I was sent, being a florist's daughter, that matters, were this lovely bunch of irises from Iris Evans, wanting me to carry on the work that we had begun in terms of kids and all of those. So here we are, almost 20 years since I was first elected, and still a cheerleader for Roots of Empathy and now Seeds of Empathy. And it is a huge congratulations to this huge milestone, Mary, and your wonderful team. So one of the things that's obviously exciting me in my new role is I remember as Minister of State for Public Health, I remember saying to Mary, how can you indigenize this? How will we make sure that this isn't just the sort of white person's sort of imposing on we know what's best for you after years of failed paternalism. How do we actually do this? And so I was so thrilled the last time I met with Mary and saw all of the brochures in 4 languages, from Cree to Inuktitut to Mohawk to Ojibwe. And so Mary, I want to say hi, Kuyanomik, Niaway, and Miigwech. So it is again, working in the way that you do. That means including residential school survivors who frankly have a good reason not to trust educational institutions that now are sharing and helping in your programs, to be involving elders in the training at the centers as observers, to provide their wisdom and guidance, but the rich cultural perspectives, because we know that it is only when kids have a secure personal cultural identity, their resilience, their sense of control, that's how they make healthy choices. That's how they get good health, education, and economic outcomes. And so it needs to start early, and as we've learned so clearly from research and from practice, that role of the elders with the kids is huge. So I think I was there in the room when 420 chiefs passed the resolution to endorse the programs as a way of healing the wounds of the past. And so it is amazing that we are now on that journey to actually, as it says on everything here, to be able to create peaceful coexistence and be able to decrease conflict in social and emotional literacy and sound parenting skills. I remember in rooms like this, coast to coast to coast, as Minister of Public Health, how when we were talking about the health goals for Canada, there were 2 things that came in every single region of this country, and it was this sense of belonging and parenting. They were 2 things that people didn't really feel that they had any policy levers for, and we didn't know what to do as governments or as frontline workers. How do you actually have policies and programs that will fill that real need that everybody in the front line and in government knows exists? So it is why I think meetings like today, hearing research, being able to know what's possible is so important, and particularly today with the focus on what President Obama calls the empathy deficit. That we also know there's a nature deficit disorder, and I'm busily trying to figure out what we do about that too, particularly for Indigenous kids who need to be on the land and need to know that that's where we learn. So, I think we were asked about epigenetics, but I think everybody in the room knows about Piaget, and that actually at 7 we're supposed to figure out that the sun isn't following us anymore. And I think that it is hugely important, the gestalt, or the ability to see things from the other person's perspective. And I think that's what we know has been missing in terms of how we see things through others' eyes. And it is so important that we all at times like this come together, and whether it's psychology or psychiatry or violence prevention or public health, we know that this has to happen, and we know that we have not done a good job at being able to see things through others' eyes. And I guess it is this, there's many blame, everything's blamed in terms of everybody for themselves, or this individualized society about what we have to do to get ahead. But we now know that whether it's businesses or every other aspect of society, that it is being able to work on teams that actually gets a collective intelligence, and that when people don't play well together, don't understand one another, that the results for whatever organization are way down. And it's we were at the cabinet retreat this weekend, and it was quite interesting how again, the understanding, the number of people who think having 50% women in the cabinet has allowed for that collective intelligence, because again, that there were people who know that picking an all-star team full of people who think that they're all on their own merit and don't have to play with anybody else does not get good results for any organization. And so this has been an interesting, exciting new experience for me in cabinet, seeing everybody understanding that almost everything we have to do as a government crosses many different government departments and many different jurisdictions, and that if we don't play nicely with other jurisdictions or other ministries, that we end up in this gridlock of not actually being able to get things done that we know need to be done. So it is I guess as Minister of Indigenous Northern Affairs, and as Mary said, that we unfortunately have this unfortunate legacy, which means that this sordid chapter in Canada's history that we actually all need to understand. So when I get self-proclaimed the Minister of Reconciliation, it is really about empathy. It really is about understanding what it means to have been in that situation of residential schools where you were told that your language and culture was wrong, and that you actually, and so what we're also seeing, and what we saw through the TRC, is that even the link between Holocaust survivors and residential school survivors and the intergenerational trauma that happens because of a situation that people weren't able to talk about, but also the idea of what happens in our relationships with our children and with our grandchildren if we were not really allowed to express emotion, weren't allowed, were never hugged and never smiled at. This is a very serious problem, and I guess I feel that we all know that the Band-Aid solutions won't work. We know that the Indigenous people have from the child mortality to life expectancy to only a third still finishing high school. We've got some statistics that we're on the wrong side of, but we also know we are now home-growing our teachers and our PhDs and doctors and social workers and entrepreneurs, and we actually are excited by these opportunities. There is huge interest in the solutions, but I think that where I need your help is that what we now know in terms of residential school and the trauma-informed practice we must all have in terms of child abuse is something we're just still not talking about. We're still not dealing with the effects of child abuse or preventing child abuse. If it's 80% of addictions, 80% of people incarcerated, then it's time we talked about it, and we actually allow our kids to be safe and to be able to speak about what's happened and be able to come forward. So I want, as the Minister of Reconciliation, the 96% of Canadians not from an Indigenous background to understand actually what happened to those people. That this is not that those residents of residential school we're abused, had everything taken from them, and there is still problems. You know, my husband made a movie that was in Hot Docs this time last year called Survivor's Row, about Ralph Rowe, who as an Anglican priest with a plane and the scout troop leader was abused over 500 boys in northwestern Ontario over 20 years. And people want to know why Northwestern Ontario and Northern Manitoba is still having problems. This is a real issue. And the Ralph Rowe survivors are again in the positions of leadership where sometimes they can't trust. They're not fully through their healing journey. This is a very, very real problem in our country, and it's still going on. And it's still going on because we don't have the nerve to talk about it. And so it's going to be important. And I think some of you know that my husband disclosed his abuse in boarding school this time last year in the Globe and Mail. Last Wednesday morning in Cornwall, 600 people showed up to hear Peter speak, and because of what happened in that community when the Children's Aid Society decided they could no longer afford to do the therapy for the children. And that community took on making sure these kids got help, as opposed to, oh, we can't afford the therapy, and in terms of that decision that was taken by an agency. So I guess I am humbled by all of you working so hard in the trenches of making sure kids get the best possible start in life. We have begun, I think, with this budget to be able to put some money where we've been talking, our priorities, and that's in First Nations education, particularly language and culture, numeracy, literacy, special ed, the kinds of things that we know will be about student success. But I think that we also know that the funding for culture and recreation centers and where people can come together and play is every bit as a part of the ingredient, and being able to get funding for some of those things that are on the land programming and getting people back in touch with the land and the water and the fresh air. So I guess I'm just here to say thank you, but it is about how we go forward together. We know, and we need every one of you to know, that we have to begin with the first principles that we're of the First Peoples. Thinking 7 generations out is what we want our kids to do. To be able to make every decision we make should be thinking about our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren. As the doctor said, that the medicine wheel is better than the medical model, right? The medicine wheel that wanted everybody to grow up, as healthy as they could be, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. That was the main. It's not running a repair shop, which is what we thought Medicare was. That it's about keeping people well, not just patching them up when they get sick. It is putting children right after Mother Earth, and I think that there isn't a day that goes by I don't think of that 10-month-old on the bed at Awapiskat 4 years ago, thinking, regardless of what's going on, this kid can't pay. We have got to be able to help that child be as good as we can be, and that's what the chiefs always did. That was their job. The community made sure no kid was hungry, and that's again has to get away from whose job it is, who pays. It's what Jordan's principle is. Let's stop squabbling and let's get these kids what they need. The other one was the pedagogy of learning by doing. I think that we all know, as you watch in Roots of Empathy programs, this isn't sitting watching a blackboard and somebody teaching physics by drawing an arrow on the top. We actually are supposed to be out and be knocked over in a stream or try and get our canoe to go forward. That's how you learn physics. This is that learning by doing was the Indigenous pedagogy. That actually is what we now use in adult ed. We use it everywhere else. I don't know why there are still classrooms in this country with kids in tidy little rows, because only the girls do well that way, and we know that. So why do we keep doing this if we actually have research that shows that won't work? And that's what was fun about being at Walpole Island last week, to see the Martin Initiative and see the the most beautiful kindergarten and grade 1 classrooms I've ever seen in my life, in terms of watching those kids being able to learning by doing in a way that is so inspiring. So I guess as we go to the other teachings of First Peoples, we go on to listening to wise women. I've always thought that was a good idea. As I get older, I'm glad I want to grow up and be an elder, not elderly. I think that there were so many things that First Peoples did, but the main one now in terms of leadership is I think what our Prime Minister has demonstrated is in his what I always thought was a feminist style of leadership. I've now understood it's Indigenous, which is asking, not telling. How do you ask the people to what they need so we can together try and get it for them? And that's what real leadership is. It's a leader, not a boss. We want leaders who actually can identify needs and then figure out how we meet them together. So I am pretty excited that we now have these opportunities to speak frankly about what hasn't worked, to be able to again make sure that we've got these virtual cycles of trying things and measuring the outcomes and then adapting so we get better outcomes in terms of a complex adaptive system, which is the way we should be funding things, such that we actually pay for what works and have the nerve to stop paying for what doesn't work but makes us feel better. It's like in public health, we used to say, oh my word, we've got to do something. This is something, let's do that. And knowing that it wasn't going to work, but politically we had to demonstrate we were doing something. And I think we've got to have the nerve to just stop all that. So I am excited that as everybody in Canada is now reading the Truth and Reconciliation calls to action, aren't you? Everybody is going to start for June reading Indigenous authors to make sure that you understand, from Richard Wagamese's experience in residential school to the kinds of things that we know, that now we've designated June Indigenous Book Club Month, so that you can all just go home right now and change what the reading was supposed to be for June, and that we need all the health practitioners to understand what cultural safety means, and how we now, as I was at Dal yesterday, explaining that universities need to be able to move on Indigenous, at least one Indigenous course for all their students. If we're going to have Canadian kids graduate as citizens, they cannot be ignorant about our past. When I graduated from U of T a number of years ago, I had to swim the length of the pool in order to be able to graduate. I don't think it's too much to ask kids to have one course in Indigenous studies for us to be able to move ahead as a society to get on with this work of reconciliation. So I think it's the only way we're going to close this empathy gap. It is the only way that we will actually have what Murray Sinclair calls the secret of shame in this country, understand the role that early childhood experience had for generations of Indigenous people in this country is really what we've got to work on together now. And so let us do this project together. We've got to think of the kids, and if we make every single decision based on what's good for children, we will make very good decisions in this country. Thank you, Miigwech.